Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Economic and Hiring Trends Forecast brought to you by the Deco Group Professional Recruitment in Chmura. I have a couple of housekeeping items that I wanted to go over really quickly. That if you have any questions for our presenters, please use the questions panel, and we will get to as many of those as we can. And any ones we can't, we will go ahead and get those answers out to you via email. All attendees will receive a post-event email with a recording of this presentation and a copy of our survey results. For those looking for CPE credits, you need to respond to at least 3 of the polling questions, and your certificate will be emailed within 1 week. For those of you that are looking for SHRM PDCs, look for a follow-up email with instructions on how to redeem that credit. So we're going to go ahead and share a little bit about the Deco Group. And we have, under professional recruitment, we joined forces this year in January of 2020 to bring all our professional brands under one umbrella so that we could really help our clients not be so confusing. And so we have our finance brand under accounting principles. Our search brand is under Parker & Lynch, and we do IT and engineering, finance and accounting, legal, marketing, and HR positions. We have our Agilon brand, which is HR, supply chain and logistics, non-clinical healthcare, and office professional roles. Special Counsel is our legal brand, and Paladin does our marketing brand. We have over 1,600 colleagues in the U.S. with 40,000 associates on assignment in 2019. We have over 10,000 clients here in the U.S., and so when we survey folks, we have a pretty good basis for getting results. For the survey overview for this survey, in September 2020, we collected responses from over 1,150 hiring decision makers. And really, we reached out to some of our core clients and core candidates that we have placed in permanent roles in the various departments that we service. We wanted to know how employers have coped with this pandemic, and really everybody's changed everything, but it's specifically related to talent management, talent acquisition, onboarding, morale, all kinds of retention issues, and what are people going to be doing about hiring as the pandemic continues. And we're seeing that, unfortunately, the numbers are rising again. And so while we might have had a little bit of a respite in the summer, we're bracing ourselves for fall and winter. So the survey, I think, has a lot of really good, meaty information, and I'm going to share with you who is going to be presenting today. My name is Lori Chamberlain, and I am the president of Deco Group Professional Recruitment and Solutions in North America, and I have the privilege of working with a number of phenomenal professionals. Nicole Gable is our Chief of Sales for Professional Recruitment. Laura Schrader is our North American Practice Leader for our Consulting Division under Parker & Lynch Consulting, placing high-level positions for subject matter expertise where our clients may need it on a contingency basis rather than long-term. And then we are also really lucky to have with us Dr. Chris Chmura, our founder and CEO of Chmura Economics and Analytics, to give some flavor. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chmura now to explain a little bit about her company and start the presentation. So Chris, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Thanks for the opportunity to take part in this important presentation. We've been providing economic forecasts for Deco Group North America's Richmond offices over the past decade, and we've really enjoyed the great questions that your clients ask us. Some background on Chmura. We do economic analysis and particularly labor data analysis to help our clients thrive, whether they're communities, individuals, or firms. We were founded back in 1998. Prior to that, I was an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond for 7 years and the chief economist at Crestar Bank for about the same amount of time before it was bought by SunTrust Bank. We have offices in Richmond and Cleveland, and there are about 40 of us economists, data scientists, statisticians, and professionals who are really driven by client satisfaction and success, whether it be on our consulting side or our JobsEQ software that some of you probably use. Excellence really is the thing that drives us when we come in every day. It's our priority in giving you good customer service and data quality. So with that, let me give you that national economic overview. On the next slide, before we went into this recession, this economy was fundamentally strong. There was no economist that I know of who was looking for a recession to start. Most places around the world define a recession as 2 consecutive declines in GDP. But here in the US, we have a group called the National Bureau of Economic Research. And within that group, they have the Business Cycle Dating Committee, who determines when a recession started and ends. They use monthly data. GDP is quarterly, and they look at a variety of indicators. I'm showing you 3 of them. So here in each of the charts, you see gray shaded areas. Those are recessions. And so employment on the left, you can see that strong increase that we saw over the past expansion. And notice that we lost every one of those jobs to the COVID recession. So we saw jobs plummeting by the millions as we've come out of this deepest dive. We've seen jobs coming back a bit faster than economists had expected. On the right-hand side is personal income and consumption. Consumption represents what consumers are spending on services and goods. This is extremely important because consumers make up 60 to 70% of GDP. So if consumers stop spending, the economy is going to stall. So you see a huge drop off in consumer spending as we went into the lockdown, and you've seen consumption coming back pretty strong. In fact, again, faster than most economists expected. Then on the other hand, the black line is showing you income. Income spiked when we went into the recession because of the money that came to individuals with the increased unemployment insurance through the CARES Act, as well as the money that went straight to households to help them during this downtime. You see income is back at about 5% year over year, which is still a pretty good rate of change. And then at the bottom, industrial production, which represents manufacturing output activity, utilities, oil and gas. And you can see again, it plummeted when we went into the recession. It's come back. We did see a little bit of a drop off in the latest number, and much of that drop off in the latest number was related to vehicle manufacturing. When we look at the next slide, we're looking at the broadest indicator of economic activity. So you see the Great Recession on the left, and then on the right, you see the 2 red lines that show us the huge drop that we saw related to the shutdown of our economy. In the first quarter, down 5% annualized. In the second quarter of this year, it was down 31.4% on an annualized basis, meaning that if we saw it occur over 4 quarters, it would be annualized to a 31% drop. The biggest decline we've seen in our history. And then when we go to the third quarter, which by the way will be out tomorrow, and we'll give you an update on that through an email. But the expectation is for it to be up anywhere from a 36% annualized gain, which would be off the chart of what I'm showing you here, or something on the lower side, 20% annualized gain, which is what we're looking for. And that's the third quarter. After that, we're looking for employment growth over the next year, over the next 4, 5, 6 quarters to be fairly strong, up around 5%. Anything above 2 to 2.5% is considered very strong. So the one thing we economists differ on our forecast, the one thing we all agree on is that in terms of GDP, this is going to be sharp, it's going to be short, and it won't be sustained. So from a GDP perspective, it's the V recession and recovery. Going to the next slide, it's really important that we consider the vaccine because the economy is not going to see sustained growth until people feel safe to go out and spend like they did in the past. And that means they won't feel that way until we do have a vaccine. So right now we've got about 10 vaccine candidates in phase 3 trials, 7 of them being funded by the US. This is really remarkable. It usually takes 5 to 10 years to get a vaccine. And then once you have the vaccine, you don't start manufacturing it until you know that it's going to be approved. And yet that would add another 6 to 8 months before we would get the vaccine after it is approved. So Health and Human Services and Department of Defense announced an agreement with Moderna in August to deliver 100 million doses of the vaccine with the goal of delivery by year end. So our federal government is now paying Moderna and actually some other firms to be manufacturing the vaccines right now so that when they do pass and when they're approved by the FDA, we'll have them available for us. We won't have to wait for the manufacturing. And then on top of that, the CDC announced back in September that it started to plan for the distribution of the vaccine to be available as early as November if we have any that pass by that time. And this is something, again, that takes many weeks, if not months, to work through, but our government is already doing that. And an example of how difficult this is going to be is some of the vaccines need to be shipped at a temperature of minus 80 degrees. And of course, the temperature will rise before we get that vaccine. But in any case, it has to be kept at a very low temperature when it's being transported. So on the next slide, we're looking at employment. GDP will be a very quick recovery. Employment's going to be very different. So to give you a sense of this slide, you're looking at employment. We've indexed it to 100. That's the quarter prior to the vaccine starting. And then, for example, the first three, or actually data through the third quarter of 2020 are actual numbers in terms of what we're seeing in employment. So if we look through second quarter 2020, it's at an index value of 87, meaning that we've lost about 13%, or 13% below where we were when the vaccine, before the virus started. So we have three different scenarios in terms of how quickly will we get back to pre-COVID levels based on when the vaccine comes. The first one is the moderate. So that's sort of the orange looking line there. And here we assume that the vaccine will be widely distributed in the second quarter of 2021. No further shutdowns, then would get to employment of pre-COVID levels 2 or 3 quarters later. The slow, so in this case it's the red, we would assume that we don't get a vaccine until the fourth quarter of 2022. We get some heightened infections either late this year, early next year, or late next year. And in that case, we wouldn't see employment to pre-COVID levels until 2023. The fast scenario would be the most optimistic, where we see a vaccine in the first quarter of 2021. And in that case, we could see pre-COVID levels of employment in 2021 quarter 2. So right now, our expectation is we're somewhere between the moderate and the fast. However, if we were to look at this by industry, some industries are not going to come back as quickly as others. So this is just for average overall employment. So in some, the economy, GDP, V-shaped recovery, employment, much slower depending on the vaccine arrival. So with that, let me hand it back to Nicole to talk about the workforce and workforce place trends.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chmura. So we're now going to delve into some of the findings and the data that we collected in our survey. And again, we're going to start with workforce and workplace trends. So headcount changes. And let me just share, as we were looking at all the data that we collected and all the responses, we saw some interesting things pop up and some things that were surprising, some things that were expected, and we had a lot of healthy discussion over all of those topics, including places where we believed that some of the responses were in conflict with others. So this is a slide that I think demonstrates that, and I'd like to share some of the insights that we were able to come to and some of the things that our clients have shared with us. So in the first question, which roles are essential to the health of your organization? You will see that sales, marketing, and customer service were the top 3 on our respondents list. Which departments are likely to expand despite COVID? Overwhelmingly, IT and technology was definitely in the #1 spot, which is important and plays a theme throughout a number of the rest of these slides today. And again, customer service, marketing, and sales right there at the top. But then when you get to the question, which roles are you eliminating due to COVID? We now see that marketing, customer, and sales are the top 3 of this list. So how do you reconcile that? I'd like to cite to some other research, and this was a study done by McKinsey. And just like we found in our survey, the majority of their respondents recognize that technology's strategic importance is truly a critical component of the business, and it is not just a source of cost efficiencies. So respondents from their study from the companies that executed successful responses to the COVID crisis reported a range of technology capabilities that the other less successful companies did not. So most notably filling gaps for technology, talent during the crisis, the use of more advanced technologies, and speed in both experimenting and innovating. Additionally, McKinsey reported that COVID has accelerated the digitization of customer interactions by 3 years in North America. And examples of that, which I think we all see in our daily lives, not just our professional lives, is the increase in remote work and collaboration, increasing demand for online purchasing and services, increasing the migration of assets to the cloud, and increasing the use of advanced tech in business decision-making. So tying back to the potential conflict we see here, I think with companies devoted to advancing tech and investing in new tech and streamlining some of these capabilities, just because a department is considered to be crucial for the health or a department is considered to be expanded, that does not necessarily mean that there will be an increase in headcount or net new headcount in that department. Conversely, the departments may reduce in size of talent, but the talent may be different and expected to work differently with each other, with other departments, and the tech available. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we asked what factors were used to decide which of your employees were furloughed, received pay cuts, and or laid off. So you'll see that 37% cited specific skill sets, 37% cited past performance reviews, 36% salary level, 34% perceived value to the organization, 30% job tenure, and then we went down to companies that either had other or did not make these types of cuts. So I think an interesting topic here is the specific skill sets. I think there is a trend in the type of skill sets that were sunsetted by many companies in lieu of more advanced technology skills. I think that aligns with a lot of the other research that we have seen. We have also heard from our clients and in other studies that past performance reviews, much like COVID-19 has accelerated digitization, there are companies that made cuts during COVID on performance that likely would have made those anyway, just likely at a longer timeline. So I think this is interesting as to what people decided to cut, and I think it plays into how they will be hiring and how they will be hiring differently in the future. Next slide, please. So what are the main areas of change your organization will make post-pandemic as it relates to adjustments and talent? So again, when I was talking about surprising and not surprising data, so part-time remote work was an enormous increase, so 44%. Flex time, again, not a surprise at 41%. Upskilling existing workforce, again, completely consistent with what we have been hearing in the market and from our clients at 39%. Continuing with a lean workforce, 38%. Permanent remote work, 35%. Rehiring talent and remove physical office locations at 24%. So just to give some color to this slide, I'm going to talk about a Reset Normal survey that was fielded in May 2020 to office-based employees, managers, and C-suite executives. So they had 1,000 respondents from the US, and here's what they found. 76% of employees stated they wanted a mix of office space and remote work. 78% wanted more digital upskilling. 75% wanted upskilling on managing remote teams. 77% using company platform systems training, and 69% wanted soft skills development. So I think their findings also are reflected here in our findings. Flex time is incredibly important. It's definitely important now during our environment, especially with many homes having to online school or homes where people are taking care of other family members or neighbors or friends. So flex time obviously is something that people were clamoring for, are still clamoring for, and companies have listened and they've responded. Another topic here is leaders managing productivity while providing flex time. This is another hot button, at least for our clients who have moved either partially or fully to a remote workforce. How do you keep people productive? How do you maintain culture? How do you lead and manage when you're not sitting face to face with people and when a computer screen is your major mode of communication? We actually developed a end-to-end COVID response service offering called Reinvent that helped clients both get back to work safely, those who needed to bring people into the office, that gave consulting on how to do that, and some talent consulting as well, and some training and consulting on managing remote teams was part of that offering, because that was something that we found our clients found to be a real pain point and a point of fear. Upskilling, again, there is a giant need for companies to upskill their current workforce, and great benefits for the companies and for the employees to get this upskilling as work has changed. And there's a lot of uncertainty as to what the future skills will be. And upskilling people on technology and more modern ways to work is definitely something that's in high demand on both sides. Next slide, please. Okay, so now talking a little bit about retention and how do you keep the talent that you really want to keep? Outside of compensation, what makes people want to work for your organization? Again, 59% good workplace culture. This was not a surprise when we saw the data. Strong leadership team, 51%. Flexible working hours, 51%. Brand reputation, 41%. Generous paid time off, 40%. 39% office location, 38% socially responsible, 38% remote working options. Workplace culture, I can tell you, was not a surprise, because historically, whenever we survey clients or reading other research, this is always at the top of the list for retention. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more on a later slide. A number of these other things, I think, make sense as we, a strong leadership team as we are leading through crisis, the need for flexibility. Office location, you'll notice here, is still 39%. So while there has been a move to remote workforces, and we will delve into that as well, this is still on the top of people's minds, and I think that signals some of the uncertainty as to what work is going to be like when the pandemic is over and people can move about and travel about as they either did before or as they want to. Again, one more point on building a strong culture. In all of the studies, building a strong culture when work is remote or when things are uncertain is definitely a hot button item. And consulting and training and upskilling around this, again, surveying and listening to your employees always hits the top of the list as to positive things companies can do to retain talent and keep and grow a culture that they had invested in previously. Next slide, please. So this, I think, is a very positive, this, at least for me, gave me a very hopeful feeling. Will your organization backfill roles that were eliminated during the pandemic? So if you look down to the good news down below, probably yes and definitely yes. That is close to 70%. And 41% of the respondents said that they would rehire in the next 4 to 6 months. So for those, looking for growth and those of you who have been strapped because your ranks have been tightened and you don't have the bandwidth to do everything you did before, this is a great positive for companies, as well as it a great positive for the market and for candidates looking for work. I'd also like to share that there's a Gartner research survey that found that 32% of organizations are replacing full-time employees with contingent workers as a cost-saving measure. So I will also share, as this is, one of our large service offerings around contingent labor, we did find that people or companies who were in hiring freezes were able to leverage contingent labor so that they did not overwork their current staff. We also found that companies, and especially now, looking to morph and to grow and to change with the new environment of work are also leaning on contingent labor, and sometimes in skill sets that they have not before. So I do think contingent labor is definitely a solution that a number of our clients and other companies are finding, and I think it is going to be interesting to see how the contingent hiring needs change and the skill sets change as to the type of temporary workers different industries are looking for. Okay, the next slide, skill sets and demand. So what are the hottest skill sets, and what are the skill sets that companies are hiring for today, and how has that changed over time? So I'd like to share that this data and this slide came from Dr. Chmura, and they did an analysis of job postings to determine the skill sets that are currently in demand and compare them to the skill sets in demand in job postings from last year. So her group plugged in critical thinking as the skill set she wanted to look at in job postings. And if you'll see here at the top of the graph, so the blue line shows job postings today, where critical thinking is an essential requirement and skill necessary for the job. And the gray line shows job postings with critical thinking as an essential skill set from a year ago. So if you take a look at this in March, the job postings for critical thinking fell below the need from last year. But in August, there was a significant uptick, and that just shows us that critical thinking seems to be more important now in job postings and in new roles than it was last year. And if you look down below here at the occupations, so these were the job postings where critical thinking was an essential skill set. So registered nurses came in at number 1, which I think is understandable during the crisis and expecting those individuals to be able to think critically and make some very quick decisions. But also take a look at accounting and auditors. So finance accounting is seeing this skill set become more important in their hiring as well. And I think you can, there are some very logical conclusions you may be able to make that it could be because of the CARES Act. It could be because how these departments are helping with PPE or different things around the pandemic. However, again, as roles are changing and as companies are putting more of a premium on the skills that they are hiring rather than the particular roles, I think this is going to be a very interesting trend to watch. So again, here are our data around this. What skill sets have become more essential to your organization during the COVID-19 pandemic? So adaptability and creativity topped our list at 45%. Critical thinking, problem solving at 41%. Financial management, 40%. Leadership, 38%. Crisis management, 38%. Digital understanding and tech savviness, 37%. Project management planning, 35%. Client services, 34%. Data literacy, 24%. So again, I'm going to go right back to the Gartner research. So they shared that to build the workforce you need post-pandemic, there needs to be a focus less on roles than on the skills needed to drive the organization's competitive advantage and all the workflows that fuel that advantage. So they found that 55% of organizational redesigns in 2019 were focused on streamlining roles, supply chains, and workflows in order to increase efficiency. And this approach, it did capture efficiencies, but it also created fragilities as systems have no flexibility to be able to respond to disruptions. And resilient organizations were better able to respond and course correct quickly with change. I think another interesting thing here about the leadership that came in at 38%. So the Harvard Business Review shared that humans don't function well when senior leadership glosses over reality. The sentiment was that employees do not want or need leadership to sugarcoat things to make them feel better, and that rather than downplaying the reality, they would prefer for the reality to be given to them straight. They want to be trusted to figure out how to live inside the new normal. And I think that that's very interesting as companies are making communication decisions and serving employees and training and hiring new leadership to listen to what it is that we've heard from employees across the country as to how they want to work with their leaders and the trust and that they hope is put into them. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to move into remote work.
Thanks, Nicole. So we've seen an increase in remote workers by necessity to reduce deaths that are related to the virus. But anytime we go into a recession, it accelerates changes that are happening because businesses want to cut costs. So the question now became, how many people can work remotely and how long will this last? And Deco in their surveys are addressing the second question, that is, how long will it last? Will these workers come back to the office? To address the first question of how many people can work remote, we looked at the 820 occupations or so that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has identified. And they have surveys that they ask the particular people, or they look at the occupations and say, where can they be performed? Do they need to be performed outside or inside? Do they need to be performed in close proximity with other people? There you have other surveys that ask, have you worked at home before? Can you work at home over a long period of time? So we took all that information and we looked at all the occupations and broke them down into non-remote, partial remote, and remote jobs. And so about a third of all those occupations can be performed either partially remotely or remotely, and then the remainder would be non-remote. So going all the way to the right side, no surprise then, jobs that could be performed remotely would be bookkeepers, accounting, moving toward the bottom, lawyers, financial managers, computer systems analysts, could all be done remotely outside an office. Those partially remote would be things like office clerks, going down further below, sales managers, and then the non-remote jobs sort of make sense. Retail salespersons have to be in front of someone to sell to them. Fast food clerks, register nurses, of course, have to be there to care for the patient. Further down, janitors and cleaners have to be on site to do that cleaning. So the next question to us would be, what industries do these people work in and where across the country are they employed? So on the next slide, we mapped those by Metropolitan Statistical Area, MSA, and we used the US as a benchmark. So the US would be 100 in terms of what percentage of people can work remotely by occupation, by industry. And so anything that is blue, dark blue, represents where there can be a lot of remote workers. So they would potentially, the dark blue areas have the greatest impact if work from home becomes more commonplace or lasts longer. The green areas are those, and the darkest green are those where you see the least amount of workers in that region that can work remotely now. So on the West Coast then, some of the dark blue areas most impacted are high-tech areas like San Jose, San Francisco, Seattle. You go to the East Coast and you see Washington, D.C., where you have a lot of government or office workers. And then in terms of the areas least impacted, they would be either manufacturing intensive. For example, Elkhart, Goshen, Indiana would be the least impacted because of its manufacturing intensity. And then Myrtle Beach would be also in the bottom 10 of impacted because it's more tourism dependent. So this gives us a sense then of those areas that might see the most impact. But when we go to the next slide, we did some analysis and found it interesting that job ads have decreased in high cost of living MSAs. And what that means is there is evidence that this pandemic might be accelerating remote work on a more permanent basis. So what are we looking at here? On the horizontal axis, we're looking at job ads. So job ads are increasing on the right-hand side, job ads are decreasing on the left-hand side. And then the horizontal axis represents home prices. Home prices are a proxy for the cost of living. At the top are the high cost of living MSAs. At the bottom are the low cost of living MSAs. So go all the way to the right-hand side where you see, and the bottom where you see low cost of living, we're seeing job postings increase. So people move, and then you go to the left-hand side at the top, high cost of living, then you go down to the bottom and you see job postings are declining. So it appears that we're seeing more people going to areas that are low cost of living. And that has significant impacts. If we go to the next slide, of course, for individuals who are moving there, they are able to make more money if they came from San Francisco and they're now living in a more rural area. Certainly there is an advantage for employees to move to these lower cost of living areas, but we're starting to hear that some firms will cost adjust salaries. Microsoft is one example. So this table provides an idea of that savings. We're looking at the average cost of a computer systems design services worker in San Francisco being about $178,000, and toward the bottom in Omaha, that same type of skill would only be paid about $97,000. That's a savings of about $80,000. So imagine a firm, if they shifted 100 people out to Omaha, that would be a savings of about $8 million. Or if they decided to start hiring people in Omaha instead of San Francisco, you'd see the same cost benefits. So again, advantage for employees, and now we're starting to see employers start to take advantage of that cost savings. So with that, let me hand the virtual microphone back to Nicole. I believe she has a poll for us.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so a quick poll. For roles where physical presence in an office is not essential, what is your biggest reservation, if any, with remote workers? And if you'd kindly select one, we can pull up those results. Okay, so here, thank you. So here we have our results. So 45%, the majority said performance management concerns, which is interesting and something we touched on earlier before. 33% risk to company culture, and 22% no reservations. Thank you all for participating, and we will have a couple more polling questions throughout the deck. Okay, so following on what Dr. Chmura just shared about remote work. So we also polled respondents and asked what were the top benefits of hiring a remote worker. And I think it's very interesting. The top three were more satisfied employees, more productive workforce, and better distribution of working hours. So why I think that's interesting is that paying employees less was the least important benefit. That doesn't mean it is not a benefit, and I can tell you that that is a consideration that clients think about as they're making hires right now, but it is not what our respondents found to be the most important benefit. And I think the fact that employers are paying very close attention to employee satisfaction for retention purposes, and acknowledging that remote workforces, both before the pandemic and in studies during the pandemic, have shown often increased productivity with no time on commutes and fewer interruptions, and with the right type of management and productivity-driven KPIs, that a lot of companies have found a great advantage in productivity from remote workforces. Additionally, an interesting question was when we asked if there would still be geographical considerations when hiring a fully remote candidate, and 62% said yes, which is interesting, and I think it just shows that we're in a little bit of limbo here, and people are not certain, obviously, as to what's going to happen when we come out of the pandemic and what the new normal is going to be. So if it will be a hybrid, geographical considerations are still part of it. I can also tell you that when we looked through our respondents and we controlled for legal buyers, legal buyers, law firms, and in-house departments, the percentage that said it would probably or definitely yes be a consideration when hiring remote workers was much smaller than our non-legal buyers, which I think is interesting, and I think I think it's a sign that our legal buyers are jumping on a very progressive and modern track approach to this. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we have another poll question. How important is your employee's ability to return to the physical office as a key indicator of the future success of your organization? And kindly select one. Very important, somewhat important, not important. And these results should be popping up any second now. I'm tempted in the silence. Oh, here we go. Okay, I was going to do the Jeopardy song, so we can all be happy that didn't happen. How important? Oh, so we said very important was only 16%, somewhat important, the majority at 54%, and not important, 30%. That's very interesting results. Thank you for participating. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the mic over to Laura Schrader, who is going to discuss compensation trends and cost-saving measures.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, so we wanted to look at how compensation will be changing, and we asked our survey respondents several questions about compensation. So first off, regarding bonuses, 61% felt confident that their organization would offer bonuses this year, and an interesting aspect of that was that actually 54% said that their bonus would be slightly higher to much higher than the previous year. So that statistic may come in surprising in a time when so many companies are really struggling from the impacts of COVID-19, but it could also be that companies really made the decision to make adjustments to incentive and compensation programs or targets to really increase the dedication necessary to maintain that company stability and ensure that they are operating in a nimble and resilient manner. COVID-19 has required many companies to pivot, and incentivizing employees to fully drive that new mission appears to be the case here in many instances. And now, Chris, I do have a question for you. I know you had some thoughts about a K recovery theory as it relates to bonuses.
Right, and as Laura said, at first glance, you would think 61% of people think they're going to get a bonus during a time when we're going through a recession and a virus. But if we think about that K recovery, what we are seeing, and this is the upper part of the K, is people that are able to work from home, that are more educated, that are higher paid, are doing well, and they will probably get bonuses. But then the bottom half of the K, there's a whole group of people that are less skilled. They're working part-time, retail, other areas where they can't be out there. Clearly, they're not going to, they're not seeing their economy, employment coming back as fast.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so next we asked about merit increases. So 78% of the respondents expect that their organization will still offer merit increases this year. And a point to consider is how merit increases will be evaluated during a really tough and bumpy year for many companies. So could merit increases be around the ability to flex and to pivot during the pandemic, the ability to show resilience, or even the ability to show creativity in the face of the challenges that we've experienced this year? And if you recall from some of the statistics that Nicole shared, adaptability and creativity is the #1 essential skill set to organizations during this time of the pandemic. So will they be around those areas, or will they be held to maybe some previous merit standards? And some of that really remains to be seen, but the fact is that so many organizations are operating in a much different manner. And will some merit increase reflect the impacts of the actions and the resilience of their employees during 2020? So next we inquired about salaries as it relates to hiring new employees during or post-pandemic, and 40% said the salary would be the same, but 42% said that it would be slightly less or significantly less. So why is that? And there could be a few reasons to consider that we've touched on. One being that companies are opening their geographic limitations to access talent across the country. So there may be some considerations for hiring people from areas with lower average salaries. But if a company is considering undercutting salary below market thresholds, there's some definite risk to consider. And attracting top talent, still a very competitive game. Unemployment for degreed individuals is 4.8%, and that has been steadily declining the last few months. And there was a really great article that came out from SHRM this summer, and it was titled, "Developing a Post-Pandemic Pay Strategy." And it said, and I quote, "As employers begin compensation planning for the rest of the year and into 2021 and 2022, they not only have to consider pay levels, but also what type of organization they need to be to thrive in a post-pandemic marketplace," end quote. So really asking yourself, as you plan for next year and beyond, do your salaries align with attracting the type of talent that will help build your organization of the future? As a side note, if you are looking for any resources around competitive salary data for your market, we did recently release our 2021 salary guide, and one of our local colleagues can absolutely provide that to you with some market insight. So in the post-webinar survey, please be sure to indicate your interest in that salary guide. All right, so on the next slide, we asked about, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn this back over to Chris. I know you have some other data to share with us.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So here again, gray shaded areas are recessions, and here we're looking at the number of people quitting their job with the expectation that they're going to be able to find a new job in short order. So notice that when we go through times of expansion, for example, 2018, 2019, the number of people quitting their jobs was increasing over that time because they knew the economy was so good they could find a job. Boom, we go into the recession, the COVID-induced recession, and that drops off considerably. So this is all about retention. Retention is much easier during bad economic times than it is during good times. But notice just in the past couple of months, as the economy has started to recover, that we're seeing that more people are starting to quit thinking that they can find another job. So before you know it, when we get out of this recession, we'll see people, again, quitting. Retention will be something else that's going to be higher on your minds. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so next we did ask about stipends, and so the rapid switch to remote work has definitely put stipends at the forefront of the work from home conversation and compensation trends. So in our survey, 38% of the respondents indicated that their organization had in fact offered stipends as a result of COVID-19. The most popular or common forms of stipends came really around home office technology, so things such as laptops, tablets, or second monitors, followed by stipends for Wi-Fi and home internet services. Home office supplies and cell phone or landline reimbursement and stipends were also common. And then some other areas included home office furniture and co-working space stipends, especially where companies had decreased their real estate footprint. A lot of companies are really employing kind of two approaches to setting up stipends. The first is the stipend that helps their employees build their remote work environment. And so this is most common right now, and many of these examples are shown here on this screen as a result of that shift to work from home. However, as remote work trends continue and seem to be here to stay for the long term, there are some creative ideas that companies are putting in for those long-term perks in a remote environment. And these can really drive culture and retention to be a stronger organization of the future, as well as replace any perks that employees may have enjoyed in an office environment. So on the next slide, I believe we have another poll coming up. So as the pandemic continues, do you anticipate additional cost-saving measures at your company most centered around, and please select one, headcount management, real estate reductions, benefits and expense management, or none of the above? And we'll have these poll results up in just a moment. All right, so leading the way, just barely, is none of the above, followed by headcount management, and then very closely behind that, it's almost a tie between real estate reductions and benefit and expense management. So we did ask in our survey about cost savings initiatives, and on the next slide, you'll see, of course, many companies were very laser focused during this time on cost saving initiatives as the pandemic hit the US and deeply impacted the economy and their business. And we asked about specific cost saving initiatives that were most important to their organization. So leading the way there were hiring freezes. 40% of our respondents indicated that they did implement a hiring freeze during that time. This was followed by delaying promotions or merit increases, tightening benefit offerings, salary decreases, and layoffs and furloughs. 25% indicated no bonuses, followed by 23% utilizing a contingent workforce in order to have more flexible labor costs. 20% indicated that they eliminated real estate as their most important cost-saving initiative. And so I think what's interesting as we look at this, this survey question is that with the first 8 most commonly selected cost savings initiatives, they're all very employee focused. Now, in the long term, with many organizations really looking at shifting to remote working on a part-term basis, but a long-term basis, how will that real estate from a cost savings initiative become a bigger player in the long-term strategy for organizations? The employee costs may be very much easier to cut and impact initially, but as real estate leases come up for renewal, many companies are really reinventing how they approach a brick and mortar footprint and better utilization of space and essential office needs. All right, so looking forward, so what is some of the good news? And Chris, I know you have a few thoughts to share with us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Laura. Well, economics is known as the dismal science, so let me try to break that perception with some good news. Ken Budd of The Atlantic on July 5th wrote an article that was published entitled "COVID-19 Won't Change Us Forever," and I encourage you to Google it and read the whole thing. It's a quick read. Some of the things he pointed out: within 3 years after 9/11, the airline industry set a record high for passengers. The 1918 pandemic was followed by the Roaring '20s in the US. In 1919, the year after the flu pandemic killed almost 700,000 Americans, Major League Baseball set an attendance record. And we build after disasters. You can see San Francisco, Chicago after the Great Fire of 1871, Warsaw, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And we've all heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's scientific evidence and studies that show of something called post-traumatic growth, and that is that people thrive after enduring negative life events. So yes, COVID-19 won't change us forever.
Thanks, Chris. And from our perspective, some very positive things happening as well. We've absolutely seen an increase in permanent hiring by our clients as compared to Q2, meaning that many clients have now resumed FTE additions after those hiring freezes that we talked about. And some are even rehiring back roles that were previously vacated due to the pandemic. And so if you recall from some of the earlier slides, 41% of our survey respondents stated that they would rehire those roles in 4 to 6 months, and we're starting to see some of that happening. We're seeing that hiring uptick across all industries, but the ones that have significantly picked up with FTE additions since Q2 include manufacturing, mortgage, financial services, and banking and legal. Some companies are experiencing an increased business demand, and they're choosing to augment their teams with staffing and consulting resources as more of a short-term strategy while they determine if that business uptick is long-lasting. And then others are employing a more long-term strategy for utilizing that contingent workforce, keeping their employee costs more variable to accommodate an evolving business model and a reinvention of the way that they conduct business in a post-pandemic world. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has become an increasingly important topic in 2020 and is really top of mind for so many organizational leaders. Increased investment in DEI initiatives, education and awareness, and training is leading many companies to truly create lasting change with DEI and put this focus as a core principle for their organization.
Okay, so I will jump in here as well with increased flexibility. Again, not only are employees demanding this, but another benefit of this is, frankly, there's a big percentage of the workforce that without this increased flexibility may have had to take themselves out of the workforce during the pandemic. So I think this is a positive trend as employers are paying attention to what people need to be their most successful, and it is working. And then second, access to a larger talent pool. So with the introduction and acceptance of remote work, employers have a much larger candidate base to choose from. So not only can they find talent sometimes that is less expensive, but they may be able to find talent that they couldn't before in their zip code. We have a leader in our company. His name is Andy Erst, and he always says a lot of very smart things. And he is continually reminding our fields that the question before was, our clients expect us to find the best available talent in their area. And now most of our clients are just expecting us to find the very best possible talent, full stop. So I think that is a positive, and I think it's interesting to see where this will go in the future.
All right, so as we wrap up, I think that we do have time for 2 questions, and the first one is around hiring. So I'm going to give that question to you, Nicole. What are some changes to hiring processes that organizations are implementing as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, and I'm going to go very quickly because we're up against the clock. So number one, some very easy changes. Companies are getting very good at screening, interviewing remotely using the type of technology, and they're also finding that they're able to move quicker and go through the hiring process faster without having to have the in-person steps. Number two, and this is kind of bigger picture, and this goes back to something we talked about earlier today, the need for and the focus on skills rather than roles. A number of companies are employing a tactic or employing talent mapping. And those of you who are not familiar with it, it is an assessment of where your company is going, the processes and functions that will get it there, and a relook at the roles that you currently have in your org and the skill sets underneath those roles, a reassessment and realignment to make sure that the roles that you are filling in the future and the talent you have in those roles aligns with your mission. And it is part of one of our offerings, and I can tell you that many clients are doing it themselves with their HR department, and many of them are reaching out for consulting help in that space.
Great, thanks, Nicole. All right, next question. So Chris, this is a question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind that has come through. Any guesses as to how the election may impact the economy?
That's a great question. So just as background, we at Chmura all vote, but when it comes to our research and our models, we put on our apolitical hat. So either administration, it doesn't matter who's elected, when we see the last stimulus passed, that's going to help the economy. Whoever's elected, they're going to see some huge impacts. We're going to see growth in the economy when the COVID vaccine comes. We're going to see that economic rebound continuing for at least a year and a half. Whoever's elected will need to deal with the federal deficit, and that will probably be in the 3rd or 4th year of their administration. So dealing with that will probably have a muting effect, and both will benefit from the supply chain coming back to the U.S. because of during the COVID, we saw that there were certain things that we could not get that were in other countries that are critical now to businesses. That's beyond just the protective equipment and the pharmaceuticals. If we see the Trump administration back in office, a question will be, will we see trade wars? What issues will come up with China? Can we move beyond the partisanship that has been going on recently? If Biden is elected, clearly we'll see an increase in regulation, which tends to slow the economy, especially from what he said in the oil gas arena. He's said that we'll see an increase in taxes on the corporate side and high income side, and of course that could have a muting effect on the economy. Something that both of them hopefully we'll deal with will be the immigration reform. But the bottom line, to the degree that they're successful, they'll need to have the Senate and the Congress on their side. And can that happen? It doesn't seem clear that we will get that much of a change.
Thanks, Chris. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. I do have just a few last-minute reminders. So CPE certificates will be emailed within 1 week for those who qualify. For those looking for SHRM credits, be on the lookout for an email with instructions on how to redeem your PDC. And a recorded version of this presentation, along with a copy of the survey results, will be emailed to all registrants. My contact information, as well as Chris's contact information, is listed here if you have any questions regarding the information in the webinar. And I just want to say a really big thank you to Lori Chamberlain and Nicole Gable from Deco Professional Recruitment, and also a big thank you to Chris Chmura and her whole team for all the work that went into providing this economic data and insight. It was very appreciated. And please remember, any of you can check out Chmura Analytics website for more information on various events that Chris and her team puts on and the capabilities of Jobs EQ. As a final note, for those of you in the Richmond and the surrounding Virginia markets, we know that you look forward to our annual event with Chris every year. And so we wanted to make sure that you still get the Virginia data that you have become accustomed to over the last decade. So thank you for sharing Chris with us. I know so many of you are familiar with her. The Virginia specific seminar will start shortly after a brief break where we will switch platforms. If you have not yet registered and you'd like to attend that Virginia specific webinar, the links are shown here. And we have also pasted them into the chat function. We will start back up in 10 minutes on the Chmura platform with our Virginia portion of the webinar. So I thank everyone for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful day.